What is up, everybody? Solomon here. Super excited to be with Genfinity once again, tackling the Algorand ecosystem. I think it's week 7 here of Algoland. There's tons of stuff that you guys that are watching this can get involved with if you choose to do so. We're going to talk about that. But we're going to be talking about the future of gaming, and Simon from Cosmic Champs is with us today. Simon, gaming's going through a weird identity crisis right now, and we've got mobile dominance, we've got attention spans throughout the world kind of shortening. We've got microtransactions everywhere. What's your take on where gaming is kind of heading in the near term, next 2 to 3 years? And thank you for joining today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. A really good question. And it's a topic that kind of comes up in a lot of spaces, like cross-chain gaming spaces, etc., that I attend to frequently. So I would say there are two things that kind of compete in Web3 gaming at the moment, and one is like this need for validation, or need for these behemoths from AAA studios to kind of try and enter. And then there is this let's call it philosophy of decentralization, where like indie studios should benefit more, like your ownership should benefit more, you shouldn't be at the mercy of these AAA studios. So these are the two narratives I kind of see. But like what we're seeing, like in terms of adoption, in terms of like what other people, other builders share with me in spaces, is that everybody was hyping this Web3 narrative. Everybody was hyping NFTs, and it kind of just didn't stick yet. Okay, so I'm super optimistic still. But for example, and when people say gamers hate NFTs, right? That's a common theme that you kind of hear out from people saying things against Web3 gaming. So the thing is, gamers hated DLC too. Now's the norm, right? Gamers, they adopt. And I'm not saying this is good or bad, but I think the Web3 gaming, like the gaming narrative, or let's call it mega cycle, is still to come. So that would be like just a short insight.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think you could say gamers hate NFTs, but you could also argue that in a way they're using what NFTs represent already in games. I mean, unique items, like you mentioned DLC. I mean, anytime you go and get a game now, like especially if you pre-order, you end up getting like a unique outfit for a character, or a unique weapon, or whatever it may be. I think you bring up an interesting point too, as far as like people that are gamers don't like the term, Web3 or NFTs. I brought this up in a couple of interviews. I think that we're probably headed towards a future where in 20 years we don't even use the term Web3 gaming. We just use the term gaming, that and gaming just uses Web3. Do you kind of think that might be a future where we're headed towards?
Oh yeah, 100%. So again, like we also stopped using. So okay, this is a let's call it crypto, audience space. So I'm using the term NFT and Web3 like freely. However, like when we are putting out announcements, about our project, stuff like that, like a lot of times we say digital collectibles,
Sure.
your in-game items. Like you have to, sadly at the moment, you have to just move away from these terms because they don't have this positive connotation attached to them.
I think it's also even from the even using, like I saw a post like a couple months ago, even using the term wallet. Like what's interesting to me is like you and I have probably been in. How long have you been in crypto for, blockchain?
So like very actively building, I would say like since 2020. So like I started actually building like on in a startup on the sandbox. That was metaverse was the next big thing back then, right? It was pretty neat, and then it kind of just fizzled out, and I found my place here in Algorand. But yeah, like it's been a while.
It's almost like you have, like, when you talk to people, if you're really trying to get people interested, you have to just like, because you naturally develop language that you're using over a number of years in this space. And like even using a word like ecosystem, like I've had somebody be like, well, what's an ecosystem?
Yeah.
I'm like, oh my gosh. Like, I think my wife's mom asked me a couple of years ago, how are you mining Bitcoin on Coinbase? And I was like, we've got a little bit of work to do. I think that leads me to, you know, what you think some of the biggest friction points are. It's interesting because when we look at anything that's, you know, any sort of blockchain or crypto or DLT type stuff, we've come so far. You mentioned 2020, you probably couldn't even do a fraction of the stuff that you can do right now. And how easy it is to onboard people, but we still have a long way to go. So what do you think the biggest friction points to really kind of garner some gaming or NFT or whatever it is adoption is?
Right. So I would say like the friction points kind of remain the same that they always were, you know, because if you want to have games be blockchain enabled, you have to have some sort of a wallet, you know, integration or stuff like that. So there are like two solutions there as they were in the past. Either you abstract it completely, you know, handle everything under the hood, you know, like let's say, you know, exchanges handle your wallets, or you know, tap into this native, you know, DeFi space, but then you lose a huge audience, right? So yeah, like abstraction is currently the narrative that everybody's doing. You know, just it's a normal game, right? You don't have to know what's happening underneath it. And at the end of the day, you know, that's the point. You know, you want to just install your game or just access your game however you want and just have fun, because the games are about fun. And the narrative is still, you know, removing the friction, but the friction at the moment is still enabling Web3 elements, I would say.
Yeah, I think the biggest kind of, if you look at how gamers kind of are, like I even just think like, okay, right now, if I were to go and buy a game for PS5, I know for a fact that a lot of the times whenever I go to download the game and start the game, there's like this really long, there's T's and C's that are really long that you have to scroll down through.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like, okay, it's like infinite scroll, and then you click accept because nobody's reading that.
No.
So what horrifies me is to think like, I'm glad that crypto and blockchain have come a little bit of ways, because now there's things like you know, auto wallet create that just like basically are all attached through email, and then eventually you obviously have to write down your private keys and stuff like that. I just imagine downloading a game and it giving you your 24 words or whatever, and somebody just auto scrolling through it and being like accept like,
Yeah.
and then getting all of this stuff and then being like, oh crap. So I do think we've come a long way as far as like the email logins and things like that, but we still do have a ways to go. I think what's really interesting is, you know, I look at what you guys are doing through Cosmic Champs and really kind of like uniqueness through NFTs as just kind of a part of it. I think ownership is really going to change in the future, and I think that blockchain and distributed ledger really offer each of us to own not only digital assets, but probably even in the, you know, further in the future, our own data and things like that. I go back to when there's a game called I think it was Diablo 2 that did it, or maybe it was Diablo 3. Maybe it was Diablo 3. Whichever one introduced the marketplace. And there was like people just like slanging items like for like thousands of dollars. And that was like before crypto got big. It's the same thing that we're probably going to see happen with traditional gaming. But what do you think the power of digital ownership is as far as these in-game assets eventually? Even if you want to go down the rabbit hole of interoperability, and if that even,
Oh
if you
yeah,
think that works.
that's a buzzword for sure. Like it's not used as much as it used to be. But yeah, I'll just start at the beginning. So yeah, and you know, ownership of your in-game assets, right? That's the value proposition for the blockchain, at least for the blockchain gaming. At least it should be, right? But if you think about it, right, as you said, it was already done before to some extent. You know, you could trade your in-game assets before, and like, however, you were kind of constrained by the platform, by the, you know, the developers, etc. However, if you think about it, if you really think about it, you know, let's say let's talk about the in-game collectibles for the Web3 games. You know, here the NFTs, majority of their value, you know, it's still derived from the game that they are used in. So even if you have all this flexibility, you know, the majority of value is still kind of centralized, right? So there are, I would say, there are a lot of kinks to iron out, but I think like the bigger benefit of, you know, decentralized, let's say, ownership, or, you know, ownership on the blockchain is like provable scarcity, right? That's something that, no entity can just magically change, how many of very rare items, they have in circulation, stuff like that. Like, I think the most of value comes from this provable scarcity, provable, history, how things were moving, like trackability. Basically, you cannot hide things. Transactions are not anymore a black box. I think that's like the biggest selling point for why Web3 gaming should be the next narrative, or why it has, it enhances your gameplay. If you're no worse off than you are if you're, not using it, and you only benefit from it. So I think that's like a fine point there.
Yeah, and I think the gamers are already emotionally kind of invested into these digital goods anyway. So it should be kind of a seamless transition. I think one of the things holding it back is the fact that we've kind of, you mentioned, you were building on Sandbox very early on, and I think what we kind of saw with a lot of blockchain was you essentially had token economy being more important than game quality, or like what the economy like kind of over the game quality. Like, and I think that it's backwards, because gamers like gaming. Gamers don't have to necessarily know how to, have to have a PhD in economics like to like to play a game. It just has to make it a little bit better. So what do you think the industry, I mean, do you think that the industry, crypto, blockchain, has learned lessons from what we've seen over the past handful of years? Or do you think that, because it still seems like we're kind of in that middle ground where, like,
Again, a really good observation. Yeah. And I can speak to it because, like, 2 years ago in, let's say in Twitter space, we were talking about, tokenomics, you have to launch with a token, stuff like that. Like a year later, everyone's talking about, guys, there has to be zero friction. Game needs to be fun first. Now everybody's talking about, hey, we need to get these big studios in to get the validation. So like these narratives change, like they're changing all the time. But I, like, as a project, founder, I would say like this: tokenomics are so hard to nail, and for the most of the cases, for most of the people who kind of are still around, tokenomics were mostly, having a native token tied to the game or to the ecosystem was mostly used as a means of raising funds, because it's a new measure, and I think that's a really good thing, frankly, because raising funds, like, when you're competing with those large studios, is a really hard ask, right? And in this Web3 space, like, you have all these, you can call them micro investors. Every person can potentially, let's call it invest, not a financial advice, guys, but every single person can just buy like or help you support your project. Like, it's a completely different, I would say, how to call it, scope of who you can interact with, who can support you. And again, tokenomics, really hard to nail, but a really good enabler for building stuff.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, I look at like platforms like Kickstarter and some of those other platforms out there. I think one thing that blockchain and distributed ledger does really well is it almost forces, it can, I shouldn't say it almost does, or because there's obviously a lot of caveats to this too, but if done correctly, it almost forces accountability and transparency too. But it opens up, like, we've come so far where it opens up the ability for anybody in any jurisdiction on the planet to be able to participate, assuming they meet regulatory requirements, all that other jazz. But I think it's going to be interesting to watch where we head. It almost makes me feel too, and just like a little bit of a sidebar, I feel like crypto, and you probably, I don't know if you see this, but I feel like every couple of years we almost have these like back to the future moments. And I've used this example before where I remember when I first got into crypto in like 2016, 17, like micropayments were being talked about, and then they went away, and now I'm seeing micropayments again. Same thing with like tokenization of like fine art and fractional ownership and all that stuff. Now it's kind of went away a little bit now, but guarantee you it'll be here in a handful of years because of all the big entities that are in.
But that's true, like, for everything, like, even like jeans were in the fashion for some period of time, then kind of went away, returning again. Like, this history repeats itself. It's circular. Like, I'm 100% convinced of that. And
my son's wearing my son wears Jenko,
right?
What were you still? No, so go ahead, because I think I cut you off. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, sorry, I was just jumping in. But like, what I wanted to say is like, these cycles, let's say outside of crypto, they're kind of slower. They still appear, but in crypto, like everything is like, super fast. People say, 1 year in crypto is like 5 year in regular business, and that's 100% true. And it's a lot easier to see these patterns repeating. Even let I kind of believe we are kind of moving away from these 4 year cycles of Bitcoin. The narrative kind of is changing, but
Yeah.
like all these micro cycles, they repeat, and they repeat very fast. And yeah, like in gaming, the gaming is not different there. And yeah.
Well, I wonder. So here is like, if you want to really feel old. Well, I feel old saying this, but like, my son is wearing like Jenko jeans now, which are like the super flared bottom jeans that
Right.
have the
Right.
huge ones. And I remember back in the day, like those were like 50 or $60 or whatever they were whenever I was a kid, which was expensive back then.
Yeah.
People were selling like the used Jenko jeans for like $300. I wonder, because I think we've heard potential rumors, like if it's going to be like, I wonder if like the shift towards blockchain and distributed ledger, if it natively, I think it's partially forced by all of the builders here, but I wonder if the mainstream moment doesn't happen. I might be totally off. Doesn't happen from the native builders in Web3, but it happens from just like we've almost heard rumors that like GTA 6 is potentially going to use
Right. Right.
Bitcoin.
Like
Because if they
I
did do
actually
that, then
want to see
it
that.
would force it. It would force
Yeah,
the adoption
exactly.
almost.
Exactly. But that comes back to what I said before, right? Like at least in gaming, everybody's kind of hoping and waiting for these large entities to move in, right? What better way to really, give a seal of approval, to NFTs or, to crypto transactions within a game than, one of the most anticipated titles, like for I don't know how many years now. So yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
But I guess I mean, I'll move on from this point, but I think still, like, even if they were to do that, to make that type of a move and have some sort of integration or announce something, or even culturally make it more culturally relevant. So, I think all of that is forced by the builders that have built natively within crypto and Web3. It's the same thing that we're seeing in the banking industry and payments. Like, if people weren't innovating kind of like with that cypherpunk type like movement, like of like crypto, none of what we're seeing in traditional finance would have ever happened right now. I think it's the same thing with anything, including gaming. But you mentioned metaverse before, and I want to kind of pick your brain because I know that we see a lot of, kind of some of the and this is maybe a little bit off topic here, but of augmented reality, like 3D assets. How you think potentially like some of those things are going to tie into like gaming and maybe even blockchain and distributed ledger in the future?
So uh my view on this changed a little bit over the years. Like I actually have some background in doing VR stuff as well. Actually, fun fact, I was part of the launch campaign. Like a project I worked on was part of a launch campaign for when Oculus Go went live, and that's like years back. So again, like VR, everybody's thinking, yeah, that's a next big thing, right? It has its place, but it didn't go like super mainstream, right? And then it was this metaverse narrative, kind of the same thing, but it's kind of returning right now, and it's returning together with what you mentioned before, this interoperability word, right? Because people want to say, hey, we're going to have these assets, and you're going to be able to use them everywhere. Yeah, but right, I don't want to go too negative there. The thing is, there always has to be some sort of motivation for enabling this stuff. Usually there's financial motivation. Other reason is enough pressure to make whoever's responsible for that to do it. So I would say like this VR or metaverse or even AR narrative is still fresh. It still has a lot of potential, but there needs to be like, again, and I hate to say this because like it always comes down to that we're all waiting for someone to do something, but there has to be like this unicorn or something like that to kind of push it more mainstream. Because Sandbox was a really good example of trying to do that, but it just didn't, it didn't stick good enough. But fun fact, our game also has 3D NFTs. So our characters in games are 3D. They're all viewable in AR. Again, like I come from that background. Like for me, that was a no-brainer. It's a cool feature, but not many people care, I would say, like at the moment for stuff like this.
Yeah, what's interesting, and you brought this up earlier, is the ability for blockchain and distributed ledger for the tech to like just really streamline funding and things like that, which is really interesting because I think, you know, you could go back decades and gaming has always kind of been at the forefront of like culture in a certain way where, you know, I think of how big things like Pokemon and stuff like that were whenever I was a kid, and it was just absolutely massive, and it kind of took over. And same thing with like Super Mario. Whenever I remember when like N64 came out, but we've kind of seen a shift in traditional gaming with almost like the monopolization of gaming studios in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it's interesting to see when the pendulum starts swinging back because like so I played a game, and I don't play games all the time anymore just because I don't have time, but I every once in a while I will. And I played a game called Expedition 33, which was like you know, it was basically a breakaway of a team from a couple of major studios, and they kind of created this game with like 30, 40 people. I'm sure there was probably a little bit more.
Yeah.
That had massive success. What I think will be interesting is I think blockchain, crypto, distributed ledger could be a catalyst for more examples like that of these kind of indie teams that are kind of sick of the status quo that want to kind of do something unique and potentially like new and culturally relevant. But I don't know if you have any thoughts on that as far as like, you know, what crypto, blockchain, distributed ledger would mean for indie studios,
Right.
and maybe even just touch on the culture.
So maybe I'll just ask a question first because I'm fairly sure that I know which game this expedition is. So that's like a sci-fi thing where, you know, the world has like bunch of problems and you go into an alternate universe or whatever and solve these issues, something like that, right? I
So
believe
it was
like the
yeah,
graphics were insane, but like the story, I think the story was what was
yeah.
really
So the studio, if you ever want to look them up, I think is Sandfall.
yeah,
And it's yeah. So I won't for nobody that for people that didn't play the game yet, I won't spoil it for them. But it is super kind of crazy.
right,
It
right.
reminds me. So what it reminded me of is like Final Fantasy 10,
Yeah.
Final Fantasy
Okay. Yeah,
9.
that's the game then for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So really well done. So again, like I haven't really investigated or read a lot about the team behind it, other than it's a small team and it kind of split away. But you have this story, like you hear this story a lot. So for example, there was, you know, a Kingdom Come a game, like, you know, medieval really storytelling, but like I believe it was contending for the game of the year or something. And you know, the narrative there was, yeah, but these guys, you know, they couldn't get funding, you know, they went to Kickstarter, raised some money and build it. Like the actual reality was they had enough funding. They had like a really strong backer, right? They went to the Kickstarter just for validation. So I always take these success stories with a grain of salt if I don't know exactly what happened. But to the point that you were making before, I do feel that, you know, a distributed ledger is absolutely, you know, making a positive impact in ways how these stories, success stories, can actually, you know, manifest. So yeah, there's definitely that. As I said, you know, before, you know, anyone can kind of help you with it. People tend to be, you know, when you have your money at stake, like you are way more involved than, you know, when people are, when, you know, they just want to have their opinions shared and, you know, hey devs, do something, right? Like it's a different story when you're actually invested, like you really try to do, you know,
Well, I
what's best.
know it's always interesting for me to kind of hear a little bit more. And I know that this has kind of been more of like a broader discussion on gaming and where you think gaming might be going. And it's um you know, I always do like to kind of hear some of the milestones and tell us kind of an overview of what you guys are doing at Cosmic Champs too, and then I'll loop it back into the Algoland stuff too. But yeah, talk about what you guys are
Right.
doing with Cosmic Champs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll just give you like a, you know, one-liner description first what Cosmic Champs is for people who don't know it. So, you know, Cosmic Champs is a action-packed strategy game that combines elements from collectible card game, tower defense, and online battle arena. So gameplay is focused on fast-paced PvP battle, very similar to, you know, massively popular Clash Royale for people who were in the mobile gaming. So it's free to play, no tokens, no purchases, no paywalls, nothing. Basically, you can just install it on your favorite device, or access it through browser and play. And that's the beauty. We were talking about removing friction, zero friction right there. You can play it however you want. So what we are doing with this project is basically we're just developing it, building more and more features in, now that this Algoland campaign was here, we kind of added extra features in to support the ongoing campaign effort, stuff like that. So we have a bunch of web pages to kind of to kind of address different markets or different players. So the one that you shared was basically just the most basic, I would say, corporate version. That some recent news, short overview, and that's it. But then you have like a NFT. So at the top, if you click NFT, yeah. So that's like our NFT dedicated page. Here you can see our NFTs in 3D. If you scroll down, for example, like it's gonna take 2 seconds. Just scroll down a bit, pick a character that you like. Yeah, that's fine. And scroll down. Yeah, and bam, it should load pretty quickly. And that's your character. Below you can check their actions with the arrows below. You can see, and that's literally what's happening in the game. You can see all your characters. They're all there. And if you're on mobile, you can see them in AR. Again, it's a nice to have thing, but we wanted to make, wanted to stand out a little bit. And yeah, that's our way to kind of going for it. And we kind of pioneer these 3D NFTs on Algorand blockchain.
Super clean design, by the way. I think it's really, really cool. I actually don't think that I've seen, I've done a lot of these interviews over the years. I don't know if I've seen this level of kind of attention to detail with the characters. So I think that that's really, really awesome.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Yeah, like we have like, again, like, a lot of, so we are, taking from the successful game models, right? As I mentioned, Clash Royale, right? But we have our completely new roster, right? And our completely own, let's say, storytelling about, the characters and the universe where this is happening. So it's not like, you're slap on, rebrand, white label, ship it and hope, for traction. Like we really went into it like with our own spin on it. And yeah, like hopefully, the gamers will recognize it like even more than they do right now.
I think one of the things that's interesting, and this is just maybe like a sidebar, you mentioned, we talked a little bit before about what happens sometimes with like NFTs and even tokens. I think we're kind of at this point where at least in 2025, there seems to be a lot more ability for builders to pivot in case their audience or user base doesn't use the product or the platform or whatever in the way that they expected. I think a handful of years ago, and I'm sure this still exists in certain pockets even today. And I think that's a big pitfall is like people will spend tons of money, like tons of and I mean tons of money building something, and then they ship it, and it does not do what they think it's going to do, and it normally burns. People are going to get burned no matter what.
No, but this is the reality of the market, right? If there's supply, people will choose whatever they want. And like crypto market, maybe like let's say a couple of years back it wasn't as saturated, but now it's becoming saturated as well, because as I said, like a lot of people figure out, hey, it's a lot easier to raise some funds here and do something. However, I would say like quality products still stand out, like even more so today than they did in the past.
So people can go and play. Let me share the Algoland one today. And obviously from Genfinity's end, not financial advice, Genfinity does have a media relationship with the Algorand Foundation. So do your own due diligence on any of this stuff. But you mentioned you can just go and play. You can just go and play Cosmic Champs games, right? And it's like very low barrier to entry. So
yeah, if you're on Algoland page, you can literally just click on the Cosmic Champs quest there. We have a specific landing page created just for that. If you just click that, it opens up. Yeah, so it's basically a new landing page dedicated specifically for this event, like all the instructions for all the different platforms, everything, like we really try to make this as easy as possible for new people to come and check it out, right? So yeah, that's the landing page for this stuff. And yeah, you have like instructions for all the different platforms, etc. I think this Algorand campaign is a really good way to showcase, what Algorand has to offer. But it still comes down to, how good the builders who are included in the quest are prepared for the new people, right? You have to, every new person that's coming here, you are the ones that are making first impressions, right? If those first impressions aren't, good, then they might not stick around to check the other stuff. So, unluckily we are, featured now, 7 weeks in. But again, like we're doing our part here for sure.
Yeah, and I think I've said this before. I believe, because I think crypto and Web3 is very I think there's a lot of smoke and mirrors with indicators and metrics that we're supposed to care about. And at the end of the day, and I think you even see kind of across the board like this competition between communities on different networks, which I think obviously is just natural and it's going to happen. I'm not saying that isn't kind of important, but at the end of the day, it's still like, who are we really competing against? Like, I think onboarding real users, there's still 90-95% of the people in the world still aren't even using blockchain. And when I look at something like Algoland, I think that it probably gives, and what you, even for you guys and for all the builders, it's probably giving you guys maybe some, well, the hope would be it's giving you guys some more insight into some of the real users that are coming on and testing out what you're doing, and then taking feedback. And and I guess the point I'm trying to make is like, I would rather have, if I was built, and I don't, haven't shipped a product in Web3, but if I did, I would want to get feedback I would care more about feedback from 10 or 50 or 100 real users than 10,000 bots any day of the week.
100%.
So I think that's giving you guys a big opportunity in that regard as well. So I think that's
absolutely. And that's the thing, right? Like as you said, the metrics, the numbers in the crypto space are insane. Like blockchains kind of competing with each other. Like, just I don't care, who is the best. Anyone who brings more people in, everyone who's helping towards making blockchain being more widely used, more household name, is doing their job, is doing great. Like, this is not a competition. Competition is, if we can, competition is against time. Like, can we get all the people to, to start using blockchain like for meaningful things, like gaming, for example. That's the real competition here.
Yeah, I would love if you could, anything for the future, what you're excited about, from whether it be from Cosmic Champ standpoint or the future of gaming, future of Algorand, blockchain as a whole, wherever you want to take it, and let people know maybe where they can go and check out the game.
Sure. So I'll answer in three things. So first one, like regarding Algorand, I'm super, optimistic and looking forward to the privacy and quantum security progress that's being done there. Like recently, there were some really exciting news about quantum secure transactions, like, which is a first off. Not many people talk about it, but that's a big step. Like, this in my mind. Regarding Algorand or our project, just join our socials and come play the game. Like, if you're a gamer, you're probably gonna like it. If you don't like it, that's fine. Just leave some feedback. Help it improve for others. And yeah, just follow Cosmic Champs, follow Algoland, follow Genfinity, and that would be the feedback, really.
Yeah, I see a lot of kind of these like I said, stats and stuff like that are there across these different networks. And one stat that's always stuck out to me is like network uptime on Algorand. I think is a pretty interesting one, especially when we think about stuff with well, and I think it's important to have this stuff kind of, some of the promises of Web3 and blockchain actually happening on chain. I think that like having as much of that stuff happen in a provable way is interesting. Like, where you even think about like the way that they're doing Algoland with VRF and like the verifiably random function type stuff, where like this is all actually happening on the network, which I think is interesting. And it's not just some
that's really good. That's
some
really
arbitrary
good,
person in like a business suit picking like
exactly. Exactly. It's all verifiable. Like that's also, a really big selling point for the blockchain, like there is no decentralization. There is no central entity controlling the stuff, majority decides whether to how it's, it's way ahead of its time, I would say. Like, people just weren't or aren't ready yet for it. But yeah, like Algorand delivers in quite a few areas. Maybe the marketing isn't the strongest one, but like that side is, I would say, like it's really on. That's why we started building here, like all these years back, and we're still sticking around.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna have to try out the game. I know that with the first handful of weeks, I was super impressed with onboarding through Parawallet.
Right.
It was just very, very easy, and Joseph is always awesome to talk to. And then I've had the opportunity to try some of the applications as well, and they're all pretty straightforward and seamless. I'm looking forward to playing and diving into Cosmic Champs too.
Yeah, but by all means, like just one thing I want to share, like here, like you probably noticed, a lot of these apps, and I think that will be true for you as well, were kind of mobile first, catering for the everyday user today. It's not this old, stuff, tricky to get into. It's what you normally use, just an app, just a browser, access your website and use it. So I think like stuff like this, it's really, it helps. It helps, and we have a lot of really good apps on Algorand to showcase that.
Well, I mean, I believe very much so that this is kind of like, it's very obvious that obviously like mobile first is kind of the way to go. Like, even if you think, we could probably have a full discussion about what's going on, especially relevant in Algorand because of all the kind of the humanitarian and the relief payments type work that's going on. You have a lot of the world, I mean, literally billions of people that have access to cell phones, but don't have access to, financial means. And I think that's even, you and I were alluding to this earlier, like some of the red tape that happens with blockchain and crypto when you onboard is like, oh, I've got to create a wallet and I've got to do this and that and this. All of that stuff is going to be deeply embedded in this in the future. You know what I mean? So
100%. Part of the operating system, 100%. Like bunch of these things.
100%. Well, hey man, I really appreciate you joining today, Simon. And for those that are watching, I told you, Simon, this would be 10 minutes, but you and I did 40. I said if it goes over and we're having a good conversation, we'll do 40. Go and check out Cosmic Champs at Cosmic Champs, and go to the site cosmicchamps.com to learn more. Huge shout out to the Algorand Foundation for making these podcasts possible. And that being said, hang out with me here for a second to make sure I get this recording. We'll see you next time.
Cheers, guys.